We are taking a look at a perfect 6 out of 6 essay that is in response to this particular prompt. The directions instruct us to describe the specific examples or evidence that is needed to evaluate the argument and how those examples or evidence would weaken or strengthen the argument. So what this student does is splits up the argument into 2 separate assumptions and then addresses each in this 4-paragraph essay. The introduction is as follows. The Bill of Rights was designed to protect the rights of the American people in the best way possible without infringing on the rights of others. Assuming that the situation takes place in the United States, this group should have the right to carry out all the requests written in this application. The main issues in question seem to be covered under freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and freedom to congregate, all of which are protected by the U.S. Constitution. So that introduction frames what the argument is and says that they seem to be covered. And then what the student is going to do is introduce some of the assumptions. We can assume by the request for security guards that this group is not looked upon with favor by the community. Unfortunately for their opponents, if they go through the proper channels, such as applying for permits like this one seems to be, they are within their legal rights to gather and practice their religious ceremony non-violently. Thus, one important question, which is what the direction said to do, one important question that needs to be answered in order to evaluate this argument is whether this is the proper permit and whether the request is within the laws and regulations of the city. It is one of the foundational ideals in the creation of this country that practicing an unpopular religion is entirely protected. Some of the founders of the early colonies came here to be safe from religious persecution. It would be hypocritical to cast aside a group because their views are unpopular. So far we have very sophisticated sentence structure. We have historical precedent, and we have identified, and by we, I mean the student has identified an important question about whether or not it's actually the right permit and whether or not it is within the laws and regulations of the city. So the student is pointing out that the permit sounds great, but is it the right permit, and is it the only thing that they need to be filling out in terms of paperwork? The student goes on to say, the hiring of private security officers could potentially pose problems for this group. The county police force should be in charge of and capable of maintaining the peace in the area. It is the job of the police force to protect citizens from being harassed by intolerant fellow citizens. If the harassment goes to the point where it becomes dangerous or criminal in some way, the police should step in. The fact that this group has been harassed before and now feel the need for additional undercover security officers is cause for concern. To properly evaluate this argument, we would need to know what kind of harassment is going on, i.e. physical or verbal, and whether or not the police themselves are capable of handling the situation. This would obviate the need to resort to armed guards, who may or may not actually be necessary. It would help to determine whether or not the group's civil rights are being violated and whether the city would be within its legal obligations to grant such a request. So here, the student does a fabulous job of incorporating high-level vocabulary like the word obviate, which means make unnecessary. There is a grammatical error, and it's a very, very common one, so obviously it wasn't a problem in getting a 6 out of 6. It's in the sentence that says, if the harassment goes to the point where is only for location. So it would be goes to the point to which it becomes. That would be a perfect grammatical structure, but again, they don't expect you to have a perfect essay, they expect you to have a very solid essay. The conclusion that the student provides is, it is within the rights of private groups and citizens to hire private security officers. Celebrities, concert venues, and even high-powered business people hire security agents to maintain order when trouble is expected. Assuming there is some legal paperwork that must be filed, and this group completes it all correctly, there is no reason why they should not be allowed to hire outside help. Now here's a very important sentence you don't want to leave out. But the outstanding factual and legal questions need to be cleared up before that conclusion is unequivocal. Another great vocabulary word. The group may feel it has been let down by the official police force and that they will not be safe without additional security measures. So the student does a fabulous job of including high-level vocabulary again, and one of the most important statements that you yourself want to include in your argument essays is to state specifically that as it stands now, the argument is not sound. They're not going to give you a perfect argument. You need to tell them that. And you want to tell them that in introducing first in the introductory, but then really drive it home when you get to the final paragraph. Before you turn your essay in, of course, make sure that you've proofread Take out any words that aren't necessary, especially if you mistype and you accidentally put the word and next to the word and. You want to make sure you're not putting typos in there. And you can figure that out in the 2 minutes that you save for proofreading. And in terms of excessive qualification, that means if you take two words that basically mean the same thing, if you say it was fabulously amazing, that's a little much. And I don't know where you'd fit that in this type of essay. We mentioned, or we're going to mention, avoiding self-reference. So if you haven't checked out the video, top 7 tips for argument essay, it's going to include that. Top 7 tips for issue essay also tell you not to use self-reference. You want to use active voice, meaning not the passive voice. Open really strongly. Don't be afraid to state your opinion, and avoid cliche. So you don't want to say things like, the grass is always greener. In terms of being correct, we're not talking about factual evidence. We're actually just talking about grammar. Please use proper grammar. They look for it, and they look for it much more than they do spelling. They know that you have spell check on your computer. They, however, are hoping that you know your grammar really well. So keep this in mind. Take a look at that sample essay again and get those points.